The next slide. Yes, and we record the session, yes. And on the next slide, you see the goals. And those of you who joined from the very previous meeting, from the beginning of this conference, you heard already that in Climate Europe 2 and the policy work, we really like to understand policy needs from the perspective of local and regional policymaker, decision maker, and everybody involved in using climate services and adapting to a changing climate and also in mitigation to it. And we are very interested in what strategies, plans, and actions on local and regional levels say and how they foresee to use climate services, which role climate services play, which obstacles are to overcome, and what problems exist. And there do exist a lot of problems, which Werner Kraus knows more about. And it's the next slide.
Okay, hi, I'm Werner Kraus from the University of Bremen. I'm a social anthropologist and I'm glad to be here. So our short overview. There are significant regional variations in climate change impacts across Europe. Cities and regions are at the main front to act. What we see these days in Eastern Europe, for example, with the flooding or with the forest fires in Portugal and in Southern Europe. So it's always the municipalities which has to handle these climate hazards. Anyway, climate services are very often not known in these municipalities. So in our interviews, we realized that people do not understand what we mean by climate services, or it's new to many communities. And we argue that climate services must go beyond simply offering data and information. We have to talk to the people, integrate place-based knowledge and contextual narratives that is crucial to ensure that climate services are relevant, credible, and trusted by communities. Next slide, please. Well, the normal way, ideally, climate services follow the stages of the policy cycle: planning, policy development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. That's in theory. In practice, however, climate services are often encounter complex situations in the municipalities who have already adaptation plans. There are local networks, there are political routines and political interests, there are common laws that have to be respected and things like that. And so standardization of climate services very often is not the first priority for municipalities. The next slide, please. So we're interested in climate storytelling for municipal services. Storytelling, we do not mean to find stories that make people better understand what climate services do. We see it the other way around. We should listen to the people to listen to their stories about climate weather hazards in their municipalities to make better climate services. So we argue there's a mismatch between scientific and local understandings. There's a gap that exists between science-based framings and place-based knowledge of climate risks. And local experience and cultural perspectives are often overlooked in climate governance. So we argue that the role of local narratives is very important. They provide insights into how communities experience and cope with climate change. And these narratives connect climate impacts to cultural, historical, and social contexts. The next slide, please. It's climate governance, incorporating local narratives. It expands the scope of climate information. It integrates into social and cultural life, and it enhances democratic decision-making. So we argue for a cultural shift in climate services and in climate governance. A cultural turn in climate risk governance is emerging, challenging top-down technocratic approaches. We have to listen to the grassroots stories to make climate services effective. There are many innovative methods for climate action, like post-normal science for cases where science alone cannot solve the problems. We are looking for art-science cooperations. We include humanities who have a more ethnographic account, who are used to listen to the stories that people tell and to integrate diverse forms of knowledge. And these approaches enable more inclusive and participatory climate governance. So that is the framework of our project in Climate Europe 2 and the scope we are looking for here with storytelling. The next slide. Is there anyone?
And exactly that's why we invited exactly these two panelists to our session. And let me briefly welcome and introduce Mr. Josko Klisovic. And if you may, please switch your camera on because I saw you are in the session now.
Yes, my camera is on.
Okay, very good, very good. Very warm welcome, Mr. Klisovic. And a very short recap for everybody here in the room. I had the pleasure of hearing a speech of Mr. Klisovic in Brussels at the mission adaptation session in May. And I was just really electricized when you said the social dimensions in our municipalities have to be taken much, much more into account. So I gave a lot of acknowledgement to that, and we in the project acknowledge it very much, and other projects, of course, too. So we really wanted to be here today because you are the president of Zagreb City Assembly. You are also it's a lawmaking body of the Croatian capital. And you are also a member of the European Committee of the Region. And in the later function, you are a rapporteur for the topic towards a multi-level Green Deal governance. So we really look forward to hearing a few words from you. I mean, we want to engage with the audience, of course. Why did you say the social dimension has to be more taken into account? And what matters from your perspective when you think about municipal services, storytelling, climate, and so far? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I have to say why social dimension is important, because we are here for the people, and whatever we do makes sense if people really benefit from it. Otherwise, there is no point. So nobody has to be left behind. If somebody is left behind, then we failed, and that's not good. This is the first reason. The second reason is to be successful in this very, very profound transformative work, and that is adaptation to climate change, we need a public support. So in order to gain that support, you need to really attract all the people and engage them somehow in the process. Very often, when we organize different workshops, seminars, conferences, and in Croatia, in Zagreb, I organized in May Citizen Assembly, which was very much popular with our citizens. Some 500 citizens joined us in the main city hall just to voice their concerns and their views on climate change. And that's nice and good. I was very happy to have them engaged. But on the other hand, I understood that these are the citizens who are well aware of the situation. They are well aware of the climate change issue. And they come here just to voice their concerns. There are a vast majority of citizens who are not aware. And usually these are citizens, if I can say so-called, on the margins of the society, which do not benefit of the overall development of our city. So we need to go among them and see how to engage them as well. One of the ways how to do it, and we know that they struggle very much, for example, with the high costs of energy. They're usually poor citizens. Then when you tell them, look, are you interested in models which will completely, you will wipe off your electricity bill and be able to produce electricity on the roof of your houses by installing solar panels and be subsidized by the state and by the city, and then suddenly all of them show interest. And this is important to engage all segments of society, to tell them the story in a way they understand it, in a way that you open their ears for your message. Because when we speak about big concepts, they're usually abstract concepts. And then when you come to the citizen, They don't understand, green gas emissions, then melting of glaciers, or long-term targets in energy and climate policy. They don't understand it. One of the main messages from our citizens' assembly, which took place in our city hall, was we need, as citizens, more concrete, tangible projects, whereas we can see the benefits for ourselves. Otherwise, we are not interested in very sophisticated European political processes, national or city processes in decision-making in this area. We don't follow that. We don't understand that. Only what we understand is a concrete project and the benefit we can reap from that project. So there is lots of psychology if you want to be successful at the local level. When you speak to citizens, climate change is very present in our lives. It affects our health. It affects it can make a lot of damage to your city, as we had a terrible storm last summer, which devastated our city. Then people say, yeah, we are for climate action. But then when you start to speak with them, but that means reforms, transformative processes, then they kind of start to show doubts. They're not very, very sure if that reform can negatively affect them. So lots of psychology. And the important thing is when they see imminent threat, they are ready to act and support. But if there are long-term threats in a way, so as the climate change perceives something which is coming, but it's not here, then citizens are not that keen on doing concrete action. So there are lots of elements we need to take care of. Citizens' participation, social dimension is definitely one of the crucial, but not the only one. The other element which local authorities need to be really successful in implementing climate change policies is obviously financial resources. We don't have enough resources for all the projects we envisaged. So that's where we turn to European Union and European Union funds. But between local authorities and European Union, there are national governments. And sometimes these national governments are not led only by objective criteria, but sometimes by political criteria. So if you have a city authority which is not of the same political affiliation as the national government, then sometimes government tends to derail the money to cities which are run by the same party as the government. So there are lots of issues and sub-issues in this context. Then skillful personnel. In Zagreb, the capital city, this is kind of a center of knowledge in Croatia. We don't have that much problem. But in all other cities of Croatia, there are not enough skillful personnel to pursue and execute climate and energy policies. These are really kind of new jobs, new workplaces. So we need to educate people really to understand, to be able to formulate policies, and then to be able to implement them. Otherwise, we won't be successful. So this is a nutshell, answer to your question. A bit longer, I know.
Thank you very much for your powerful and straightforward words. I think they really well resonate in this group. Please forgive me or ask that we don't have more time right now, but we would like to introduce the second panelist, and then it's promised to the whole audience, then we start to discuss jointly. And our next panelist is Cristobal Reveco, and Cristobal is a postdoc social scientist at Garrix. His work focuses on exploring the social dimension, of course, underpinning the use of climate information in local governments. And Christoph has a very interesting record of more than 10 years working in Latin America, supporting local governments, planning efforts to adapt to climate change. And with these words and a warm welcome, Cristobal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Creedon and Werner, for the invitation. Can I share just a quick slide? I actually have one slide. Can you see it now? Yep. Okay. So since this is about storytelling, I wanted to tell you a short story about work we did in Recoleta. This is in Santiago of Chile. This was done many years ago, but I think it's a story that combines many of the challenges that we're discussing here. This is a risk map and the dotted area highlights the overlap of different types of risks. So we discussed with the local governments and invited neighbors to develop this speaking map where we identify heat islands. We identify sites where people would dump the rubbish, sites that also were under the risk of floods. So these are places in Recoleta that experience challenges related to climate change in winter due to floods and in summer due to high temperatures, extreme temperatures. And one of the things that we tried to do was to first developing this map and then go into the communities, asking questions, interviewing people, developing and further enhancing these maps. And one of the things that struck us from the beginning was in this point in Quintabela, which is one of the most difficult areas in Recoleta. It's very poor. It's controlled by gangs and drug dealers. So it's got a very kind of like an overlap between social problems and environmental problems. And when we looked at the map, the first thing we saw in a working group was, well, if there are problems with lack of capacity to infiltrate rainwater and high temperatures, we could think about implementing ecosystem-based solutions, such as just planting trees, for instance, on the streets. So we went there, and on the main road here in Quintabela, which is supposed to be a green area, there's no single tree left, so only the trunks. So people chopped the trees off and left the trunks there. And the reason being that people didn't want to have the drug dealers in summer hiding under the trees or enjoying the shade in the trees. So the whole problem that started as a discussion in terms of climate change adaptation and ecosystem-based solutions ended up being about the conflicts with related to drug dealing and the problem of course, first of all, thinking about climate change as a development problem, but also development as increasing the risks of climate change and presenting barriers to implement solutions. So maybe a few conclusions that we can derive from this study, which was again done many years ago, was the local context provides the guidelines to co-develop and think about climate solutions, and therefore to also think about how to develop climate services. Also, maybe this is going to come up in the conversation afterwards, but probably the stories also reflect the contingencies, which is something that's very important when thinking about potential solutions that are more sort of based on technical or the implementation of certain technologies. So thinking about and understanding what's important for people in that very moment provides a specific context to really understand the rules of how we can engage further in terms of developing climate services and climate solutions. And of course, maybe the most interesting part from the methodological perspective is that there are many ways to engage with local communities. I quite like the idea of developing this speaking maps as a way to enhance specific aspects of risks and development stories in specific areas. I'm going to leave it there. Maybe just one more word. Although this work was done in Chile, I think that probably many of the lessons learned can also apply to a European context. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the two of you, for this, in a nutshell, insights into, if I would sum it up, the importance of listening to the local knowledge, to the local wisdom, the local concerns. And if I understood it correctly, also that sometimes you encounter issues which you haven't thought about while you actually wanted to talk about something very different. And so thank you for this impulse statement. And now we have 20 minutes left. And Werner Kraus and I'm delighted to coordinate the discussion a little bit, but we don't want to do it too much. We just invite everybody just raise their hand and start entering the conversation. And our panelists, since we are here to help you, to answer and to discuss with you. Who would like to start?
I think you have to turn on your camera and your audio if you have.
Yes, but I see Maria Atanasoli here.
Yes, sorry. Fighting with my camera. Yes, thank you. Just to start making a comment, I thank you, Christobel, sorry, but for your, I really like your example of people chopping the trees, you know, in an area because of totally different reason than just climate change. And I will use this as an example. I think it's quite powerful. So the question is, or idea for discussion is like, we have as scientists the hazard data, we have different socioeconomic data, not data, but information, if you like. Does that mean that we should be engaging with different people, isn't it? So it's not only the municipality. Is that enough, for example, to engage us with the local government, municipality, or district councils, whatever we call them in the UK? And how to approach, actually, who do you approach and how do you start to find the relevant information about, like, the drug dealers? So other information that might not even be available, like, is the police, or how do we even start as a scientist to engage with the right people to gather all the information you need? I mean, it's to everyone, but just prompted by your, sorry.
Oh, in relation to the problem of drug dealing, I think that it was super important to talk to the local people because, of course, they live there, but also local people in this area were politically very active in the local government. So they were in constant discussion also with the authorities and the police about the problems that they were having there. So some data could be gathered, but in our team, we weren't the right people to really lead that part of the discussion because it entered more in the field of conflict resolution and issues of drug dealing, which is something that goes beyond beyond our expertise, of course. But I think that in general, I mean, of course, engaging more people was super important to really get a better understanding of the whole problem and not starting discussing climate change when certainly the priority was a different one.
So how did you go about, it doesn't have to be a drug dealer, but it could be a very specific, I use the drug dealers as very specific, something which is specific to an area that needs to be taken into consideration along with the hazard data, the climate data. So how do you, how did you start, if you know, to get to know to the problem? How do you find local information if you want to? You start from the local government or local communities, or what would be your advice? I mean, or it depends on the country,
maybe
I suppose.
to other panelists as well, or
yeah.
If you want me, I can provide the answer from local perspective, the local government, local authorities. Yeah. I mean, you consult as many people as you can. You consult scientists, professors, business people, civil community, NGOs, everybody. But at the end of the day, it's local authorities who have legal authority to really provide the credible information. So we have our own city services who analyze all the data we receive, and then they put it in a special report or something behind which all of us who work for city administration stand. And that's why we think it's credible, and that's why we are going to put it on the agenda item of the city assembly, or just provide it as a working paper for the debate, public debate in media or in public. So, I mean, we are the one who is responsible to provide the credible information to citizens. This is one part of the problem. The second part is, while discussing with all citizens who are interested in the matter, we've got information they use. But usually, as I said at the very beginning of my introductory speech, only citizens who are well aware of the problem, they are coming and sharing their views. And then on the basis of these views here, which are very much supportive for what you want, you start certain project. And then when the rest of the citizens see that something is changing and affecting their life in a way they don't like, then we have a huge resistance. So city authorities have really a great challenge to really understand what is the prevailing opinion of their citizens, not just of those who are interested and they are voluntarily coming to be part of the public debate on the issue, but even those who are a huge majority, silent majority. Unless you get their support, you can't really execute the project, because on your way you will fail certainly without public support. So to recapitulate, public authorities, local authorities are responsible for credible data, and it's a very big challenge to get a broader public support for your climate policies and concrete projects, because they always affect somebody in negative way, while it will affect majority of us in positive. But then that who are negatively affected are usually very organized, coordinated majority, very vocal majority, who are voicing their discontent very, very strongly in public. And then we have a problem. And without us, local authorities, no project will be executed. Even if the government wants to do something, or European Union, they can't do it without local authorities. Whatever you do in our city, you need a permit, or building permit, or the project must be envisaged by the spatial plans. So there's lots of things which depend on the local authorities. And our work depends on the support of our citizens. So this is kind of a chain.
Yes. Thank you very much, both of you again, and the interesting question too. And I see Pablo Borges raising hand, who had also mentioned that he had missed a little bit the possibility for discussion. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Martinez. I cannot turn on my video here. Something's blocked. But anyway, I can start. So it's very interesting to hear what the presenter said here, because I am a climatologist. I work for GIZ as an international cooperation agency. And I was also a researcher. And during my research time, I used to provide a lot of information, climate information, do analysis, climate trends, climate scenarios, all this stuff. But I realized that it never came to application at the end. And something that I perceive as a technical advisor here, working with the people, is that usually the participatory approaches, where you involve the communities that are most affected, are more effective than just like bringing all these maps and very high resolution. We love to talk about high resolution, and we need better models, all this stuff. But when you go to the community, and if you have a very good stakeholders mapping that you combine scientists, local meteorologists, local people, decision makers, at the end of the day, you have the information that is better than those information that are made by climatologists or scientists, geographers that are, for example, not in the ground. So I have perceived that sometimes you don't need this kind of super high resolution. Of course, they are welcome, but we should not stick to them. Otherwise, you can even create a kind of decision paralysis. No, you're always waiting for a better resolution, and you don't do anything. So then my advice is go to the people, talk to the people. And I would like to know from the experience of the presenters here, what are the challenges that they see in this participatory approach where we involved the people on the ground in the municipalities? Because I know you need time, you need to find the right people also to have good discussion. But is there any other things that you could highlight?
Yes, thank you very much. So Cristobal and Josko, who or both of you probably have an answer.
Right, I can say what is the experience of Zagreb, capital of Croatia, in dealing with citizens. As I said, we organize from time to time local dialogues with citizens. We call it citizens assembly. We provide opportunity to citizens to speak with decision makers in the city. And then we realized that at the general level, they all support climate change policies, adaptation, mitigation. But when it comes to concrete things, then they're more reserved. And we see that there is certain resistance to change. Climate action is really deeply transformative. action. And people are scared of change. And this kind of top-down approach and policies usually are perceived as threat by citizens, and they do not meet their support, but they meet their resistance. So we need to overcome that psychological, I would say, obstacle which we have. And how to do that? I realized the best is to reframe the issue. So when we speak about climate targets, we usually say it in terms of different bands. You don't have to do this or that, otherwise we'll be polluted, we'll have a much warmer planet, or some other things. So by bans to forbid something, this is not something citizens want to hear. But when you emphasize benefits and positive sides of certain action, then they tend to listen. And then they tend to really be willing to honestly engage. And these kind of citizens we basically need. And then, participatory democracy start to make sense. So in other words, we do not want to tell stories to citizens, but we want to write these stories together with them. So this is difference. When we tell them something to do, it's usually met by resistance. When we are trying to engage them and write the story together with them, and they feel the ownership of the process and the story, they tend to be really honestly supportive of climate policies or energy policies, city policies, which we shape here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we all more than agree that we write stories together and not someone writes a story for someone. Cristobal, would you like also to answer to the question?
Sure. I don't know if I have the ultimate answer for that, but I think that the problem is sort of framing who are the right people. And I think that opens a kind of worms, because in many projects it might be defined as those with the influence, or those somehow defined as relevant, or the most excluded ones. But of course, when you want to target the most vulnerable and the most excluded ones, are the most difficult to find, because those are not represented in the traditional institutional texture. So you really, and I think that here I go back to the aspect of going to the field, because there are local institutions, maybe based on formal governance systems or informal governance systems, such as NGOs or neighborhood groups, and they have a lot of information on who are those affected and who are making decisions or leading some movements in society locally. But I think that that's probably, for me, I find one of the most challenging parts is to define who are the right people to provide the stories. And probably the more you need a fair amount of people to ensure that the story that you're hearing is something that it can be legitimized by others as well. And I think that that's something that is also important, because one single voice is not gonna. It might be a bit dangerous to just go for one voice as the local storyline. And I think that also we have to be super careful on that.
Thank you. Now I know that my colleague Werner Kraus would like to sum up shortly, but we have a hand raising by Carlos Cuevas, please.
You need to turn on your microphone.
Thank you. Yeah, that's more useful than the camera in these cases, I think. Very interesting, all the discussion. Probably the only point I wanted to make that resonates a bit with what Cristobal was saying is that, yes, there's a lot of initiatives already taking place in different localities. I think probably it's important to consider that there's not one single participatory method that includes everyone. So I think what we have to do is to take a look at what type of organizations already exist there. What are their own ways of framing problems and coming up with solutions, and just seeing how they complement each other. What are the parts of society that are really like not belonging here nor there? And I think it's important to have like that repository of the different, well, to name it one way, the different technologies of participation that bring together some people but exclude others. That's one. And probably just to put one thing there that probably adds up another group of European actions is that there is now an initiative from the Erasmus program called the European Universities Initiative, and they implement this is like putting together groups of like 6 to 9 universities all across Europe, and they all are advertising this type of participatory methods and forms of learning, for example, community-based learning. I think probably approaching those alliances is an interesting way to see what they are doing in order to engage students with society. Climate change is, of course, one of the main topics that everybody's going to. So that's one way of exploring who to help you to attract those stories, to identify the people that should be involved. I'm going to leave it there.
Yes, thank you very much for your suggestions. And my colleague Werner Kraus, we have only 3 minutes left, will sum up. We thank everybody who has been involved, our panelists, and we will send you a message individual back. But now over to Werner, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for your contributions of the panelists and all the interesting discussion we had. I think we had a lot of examples for the 2 ways of storytelling. One thing is tell stories that people understand, even poor people in margin areas. That is one way of storytelling. The other way, meaning of storytelling is we have to listen to the people. What are their concerns, and to learn from their concerns. And that is a very strong argument, I think, like both contributions for the inclusion of social sciences and humanities into the business of climate governance and climate adaptation and climate services. The problem in marginal areas in cities, for example, as we heard, is not one of a lack of data, of hard data on climate and everything, but it's a lack of social understanding what actually is going on there. And so we are concerned here with the problem of the relation between social justice or injustice and climate adaptation. It is a topic that was addressed in the encyclica of Pope Francis, by the way. He said there is no successful climate adaptation or climate politics as long as there is social injustice and environmental injustice. And I think that is a very important point, because we heard of Santiago de Chile, for example. Social injustice, poverty stems from the extraction of resources that we use here in the rich countries, the extraction of oil, of gas, of everything. And that creates poverty and marginality and climate change too, by the way. So these 2 issues, social justice and climate adaptation, are deeply interlinked. And that's why we need the humanities to tell the history and the story, how these 2 things, how these 2 areas are intersecting and overlap, and and it's a very strong argument for the inclusion of social sciences and humanities. And I think that was a wonderful discussion. And I thank you so much for that we even had time in this 45 minutes to discuss. There was a discussion, and thank you for all of that.
Yes. Thank you very, very much for enlightening us, for giving us the opportunity to share some of those insights. Please send messages to us, to Climate Europe 2, and please visit our websites, our Webstivals, come to our conferences, and we will spread information on our project over to you. And as I said, we would like to send also messages to everybody who was involved here today. Thank you very, very much, and have a very restful and good afternoon.
Thank you for inviting us.
Wonderful, thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.